Hello and welcome to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1980 Western Heaven's Gate, and a little bit of real-world history to start things off, because this film is based on real-world historical events. The Johnson County War, or the Wyoming Range War, as it's alternatively known, was an armed conflict between large ranchers, so people who own big properties, and small settlers in Wyoming. From 1889 to 1893. The ranchers accused the settlers, who were newer to the area, of rustling their cattle, while the small homesteaders made counter-accusations that the ranchers were denying them the land and water rights that they were guaranteed under the Homestead Acts. The conflict would ultimately claim around 30 lives, including several deaths by illegal lynching, as the ranchers took the law into their own hands and hired a band of gunmen to drive out the newcomers. The homesteaders would in turn band together for protection, and ultimately they conducted a 3-day siege of one of the ranches, where a band of gunmen hired by the ranchers were holed up before ultimately the US cavalry finally arrived to restore order. Even after the war ended, feelings ran high on both sides about the events, and both sides have been eulogised as heroes or decried as villains, depending on the perspective of the person telling the story. So it's a very contentious part of history. Now, Heaven's Gate is a highly fictionalised account of the war, and it is squarely on the side of the small homesteaders. It features as its main character a man named Jim Averill. In real life, Averill was actually one of the first homesteaders to be killed by the ranchers who lynched him. He was one of the people who was illegally hung. The film, however, recasts him as the new marshal of Johnson County. And the film version of Averill works hard to peaceably resolve the dispute between the parties before ultimately siding with the homesteaders when the ranchers' provocations become too severe to countenance. The film's climax is then built around the siege of the gunmen at the ranch and the eventual arrival of the cavalry. So that is, basically the plot. Heaven's Gate was directed by Michael Cimino, fresh off the back of picking up the Best Director and Best Picture Oscars for 1978 film The Deer Hunter, and it stars a host of top names of late 1970s cinema. It had all the financial resources of a major studio behind it, and it was a massive, massive, massive critical and commercial failure. Cimino's career would never recover. He would direct only a handful of films thereafter, all of which flopped. The financial debacle left United Artists bankrupted and ended with the studio being acquired by MGM, and Hollywood's existing drift away from directorial authority in favour of studio oversight was massively reinforced. Even the Western as a genre was pretty much dead for a decade afterward. So how did this film go so wrong? Because boy did it. Well, let's talk about that. So first of all, when director Michael Cimino showed his first cut of this film to the studio bosses at United Artists, it clocked in at 325 minutes. That is 5.5 hours. Unsurprisingly, the bosses were not reassured by Cimino's promise that, the final cut will be about 15 minutes shorter than that, and told him in no uncertain terms that it had to be much, much shorter. He would spend 6 months cutting it to a mere 3.5 hours, 219 minutes is the version that I saw in the version that was originally released. Now look, it's possible to make a good 3.5 hour film. It's even, I guess, theoretically possible to make a good 5.5 hour one. But this extravagance was merely one symptom of Cimino's behaviour during the production. Given an initial budget of around $11.5 million, he would ultimately spend nearly 4 times that much. He would shoot 220 hours of footage, and at one point he would tear down his entire set and have it rebuilt 6 feet wider. And to the point of where he could have just torn down one side of the set and then pushed it, and then extended that side by 6 feet. He tore down the whole set and had both sides rebuilt 3 feet further across from where they were before. Much more expensive, but he wanted the middle where the middle was. Cimino would waste so much time on reshoots and waiting for just the right cloud to wander into his shot that John Hurt was reportedly able to go away and make an entire other movie, David Lynch's The Elephant Man, while waiting for him to actually be needed on set in Heaven's Gate. Now, you might think that the failure of this film would do something to curb Cimino's behaviour. It didn't. Given the chance to direct Footloose, which, as you may know, turned out to be a hit and might have got his career back on track, he quickly made so many financial and creative demands that the studio fired and replaced him on that movie, and it would be another 5 years before he would actually direct a film, which, as I said, probably flopped. So that's number one, completely out of control director. Number two, and I've put the bubble text on this one in capital letters because it really needs to be emphasised. This film, even at its streamlined, quote-unquote, runtime of 290 minutes, is glacially slow. I literally looked at the time counter at one point, saw that 43 minutes had gone by, and wondered, like, how can a movie get this far without anything actually happening? You could have cut a further hour from this easily, and Cimino eventually did just that after the initial release, leapt into the record box for the size of its box office failure. It didn't help the film find any success, with Roger Ebert calling it the most scandalous cinematic waste I have ever seen. But the film's complete lack of forward momentum or pace is baffling. And it's particularly baffling given that it plays extremely fast and loose with history. Now, if it was slow out of some desire to stick to some semblance of the true historical events, then I could at least understand why it would be plodding or anemic. You know, like if you're trying to be faithful to what actually happened and what actually happened unfolded slowly, then maybe your plot will be slow. But when you're fictionalizing things to such an extent as this film does, there is no excuse for the lack of things happening. You know, you're taking liberties. Maybe one of those liberties should be to be entertaining and to inject something into the story that engages your audience. Apparently not. Instead, we're treated to a whole lot of talk about how bad things are going to happen real soon now, which of course is a lie because there's still over 2 hours of the movie left. But you might be saying to yourself, well, you just told me that the end of the film is this big siege, right? I mean, that must get more exciting. You know, there are gunfights and people throwing dynamite after all. That has to have some drama to it. Well, no. Not on Michael Cimino's watch, it doesn't. He depicts the battles in this film via long-distance shots in which clouds of all but nameless characters ride around in circles, churning up massive dust cloud. That means you wouldn't even be able to recognise them if they did have names. Now, that may actually be a reasonably authentic depiction of the real fighting, given that people involved were not generally trained soldiers. But as a movie-making decision, it is a terrible, terrible one. Because, watching a cloud of dust is not interesting or engaging or exciting. And finally, and this is not so much about the quality of the film, because I think I've already demonstrated that the quality of the film is non-existent. Heaven's Gate was not merely bad entertainment that wasted the money of the studio and the talents of the on-screen cast. It is also notorious for the mistreatment of animals involved in the production. The AHA, the American Humane Association, were prevented from monitoring the animals on set and cited numerous alleged instances of cruelty, including mistreatment of cows, horses and chickens, some of which led to the deaths of the animals in question. To this day, the AHA keeps Heaven's Gate on its list of unacceptable films. And although this was not the first movie to have animals killed during its production, the controversy surrounding the film was so intense that it prompted the film industry to contractually authorise the AHA to oversee animal treatment on sets thereafter, and led to the now familiar "no animals were harmed" disclaimer at the end of most Hollywood productions. Heaven's Gate, as bankrupt ethically as it was financially, just a terrible movie on every level. So that's Heaven's Gate. Do yourself a favour, don't go anywhere near it. Next time, 1964 British science fiction film First Men in the Moon, featuring special effects by a certain chap named Ray Harryhausen. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.